I honestly did not think I would talk about any of the films in Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy on the internet, at least not very in-depth. The reason why is that anything I say would not be fully able to express exactly how I feel about these movies. They are undoubtedly iconic and bring Tolkien's works to many more people, but I have always believed they have shortcomings. I enjoy watching them, and their accomplishments are incredible. However, that's not the full extent of my thoughts on these films. This basically means don't argue Jackson's Loader with me. None of what I say here can be taken to demonstrate my complete take on them. Anyway, after that little disclaimer, let's move on to what I will be talking about. The Return of the King. More specifically, how different directors took different approaches to bring this epic climax of Tolkien's legendary work to the screen. Before we begin, this critique does not intend to give spoilers for The Return of the King. I may point out one or two to compare, but these will have proper warnings. However, since I'm talking about adaptations of a story that is the culmination of a series, spoilers for the previous movies and/or sections of the book will be inevitable because I'm discussing what comes after the first half of the story. In 1980, Rankin and Bass directed an animated version of The Return of the King. This was the first time the story had ever reached film. It came out just 2 years after Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings, which primarily covered the events in the Fellowship of the Ring. Most agree Rankin and Bass's movie is far superior. The style in this movie is distinctly Rankin and Bass in animation, storytelling, and musical numbers. In 2003, Peter Jackson's rendition of The Return of the King was distributed theatrically. It came at the end of an adventure of several years and concluded the two films that came before it, The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers. Jackson's vision plays out in the climactic movie and shows the vastness of the story's setting. There are many differences between the two versions of The Return of the King, due to one being animated and the other being live action, although the most significant differences stem from the fact that one was a standalone film and the other was the third installment of a trilogy. However, Rankin and Bass's film wasn't technically a standalone movie. It could be said that it's a sequel to their 1977 movie, The Hobbit, and that's what Wikipedia says. However, the lack of preceding movies severely impacted the way the narrative flows. A lot. In the Rankin and Bass version, a ton of stuff is just glossed over, and viewers who aren't familiar with the world get a little lost because of the pacing. Not everything gets this summary treatment, but the big kingdoms of men don't have much storytelling weight. What I mean is that Gondor and Rohan, along with most of their characters, don't get enough solid screen time to feel like actual plot elements that the movie cares about. Gandalf casually explains what happens, and we move on. I know the directors were doing this to save time for Frodo and Sam in Mordor, but it makes the battles less impressive. While this summarizing technique takes away from the movie's effectiveness as a demonstration of masterful cinema, and ends up telling more than showing, I'm personally happy that they gave enough time to the hobbits to flesh out their characters and roles, because it shows that this animation studio had their priorities straight. The battles are amazing, but the main story of Tolkien's book is that even the smallest person can change the course of the future. Their approach here makes perfect sense regarding style and medium, because John Huston's Gandalf narration complements the visuals super well. It would never work in Peter Jackson's epic fantasy films, but this is Rankin and Bass. The story's message is more important than the professionalism of the film industry in my book, and that's part of why this movie is a win for me. While the 1980 Return of the King succeeds in the central theme with Frodo and Sam, it falls short in the side character department. I don't mind the offhanded appearances of other characters because I'm familiar with the source material, but new fans would not comprehend the purpose of a lot of side characters. People like Éowyn and Aragorn were absolutely crucial to the original story, but the animated movie fails to demonstrate why. They show up and do something important, but it's hard to recognize the significance of their actions. On the other hand, The live-action movie gives enough time to make Frodo and Sam's struggles compelling, while sufficiently illustrating the geopolitical landscape and individual acts of the side characters. In other words, Peter Jackson portrays the Hobbit's efforts while giving due breathing space to the different corners of the world. Fleshed-out characters contribute infinitely more to the battle scenes in the Jackson trilogy than the big budget does, although the New Line Cinema budget does help quite a bit, especially in contrast to these animated scenes with whole armies. So, how does the difference between live action and animation factor into all this? Each medium has advantages that bring something to this story's conclusion. Peter Jackson's movie uses real-time scripting to show everything that happens in the story. As I said earlier, he gives more insight into the side characters. But it's not just the lack of narration that makes live action unique. Filmmaking standards have been integrated with live-action Hollywood movies for decades and are rarely disregarded. Animated films know the rules too, but they have a type of liberty when it comes to cinematography. The composition of live-action films thoroughly analyzes the three-point lighting system, drone work, and color schemes, along with many more technical details. It brings out the actors' performances and works really well. Animation can't realistically bring you the same experience as a well-cast, well-executed live-action film. But that's why I love good animated movies so much. Animation brings a unique flavor to the table that complements almost any story just as well as live action. Rankin and Bass pulled off a style that would never work in Peter Jackson's movies, and I like it. Their full storytelling style is demonstrated in several sequences throughout the movie, specifically their songs. Rankin and Bass have their own style when it comes to songs in film. They combine original folk songs with animation to put their own stamp on the story. There's a lot to be said about the difference in musical approaches in film because Middle-earth is inextricably tied to music. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies have been universally acknowledged as possessing one of the finest musical scores in cinematic history, but they don't accomplish the same thing as Rankin and Bass. I'd love to see an analysis of how well different musical styles complement the world J.R.R. Tolkien invented, but that's another video. On a side note, I looked into the development of Middle-earth in animated movies and the unfortunate learning experience that was Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings. I have concluded that if Rankin and Bass decided to go for it and plan out the most ambitious animated project in the United States, they would have had the same impact in the 1980s that Jackson had in the 2000s. Seriously, everyone was extremely anxious when it came to Tolkien films because no one knew what the reaction would be. That's why these movies are also experimental. Filmmakers were dipping their toes into the water, thinking that it would cost them if they plunged. If Rankin and Bass had realized that fans were ready for the epic saga in its entirety back in the 1980s, they could have come out with a 6-part film series, which would have been amazing. Just make The Fellowship of the Ring Part 1, The Fellowship of the Ring Part 2, etc., etc. Honestly, that probably would have launched them into such a success that they would still exist today, and they would be rivaling DreamWorks and Disney, but I'm getting way off topic here. Back to The Return of the King. A few specific instances stick out to me while watching these movies. In the Rankin and Bass version, they have some weird ideas about how the One Ring works, but it kind of makes sense and doesn't detract too much. In the Peter Jackson version, they have some weird ideas about Gollum, Frodo, and Sam that do indeed detract too much. It drives me crazy how they form an odd trust triangle relationship in this movie when it's so obvious who is honest and who isn't. But these things aside, there is one scene, one character, one glorious thematic sequence that has received a great injustice. Skip ahead if you need, because here come the spoilers. In the story of The Return of the King, during the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the Witch King of Angmar descends upon the battlefield like a titanic force of evil, but one brave soul stands up to the monstrous form and defeats him. And so help me, the scene in the live-action movie where Éowyn kills the Witch King is so awful that it's criminal. All you need to do is read the chapter in the book to know Jackson's portrayal of this scene is abysmal. The whole point of her character is supposed to be epitomized in this conflict, and they completely ruined it. While a great actress and a phenomenal cast for Éowyn, Miranda Otto is shown quaking in her boots and delivers the most watered-down dialogue my ears have ever been exposed to. Instead of the brave speech that shows her true character, she utters a few words that sort of convey the same intention. The Witch King's dialogue is the same story. I don't know why you had to change the incredibly chilling threat speech of the Nazgul here, but it definitely wasn't a good enough reason. I bring up this scene in particular because the animated movie gave me a colossal dose of satisfaction in this scene. Not to say that Rankin and Bass did her character justice, but they had the decency to include most of the original dialogue. And although I'm still sad they left out the Witch King's threats, which was probably to avoid being too scary, it was a great relief to hear Éowyn's courageous speech delivered via a cinematic experience. Overall, I give both styles my approval. They entertain, they appeal, and they show Middle-earth. Nowadays, I think an animated movie could pull off a performance more akin to Jackson's films, but in the 80s, it was more about the art style combined with the script, which is why they kept so many of the book's lines. Live action contains more filmmaking techniques, for lack of a better term. There's more we could do to bring The Return of the King to the screen, one of the greatest stories of our time. But these movies highlight a lot of the different things to be gained by using a different approach. As for now, if you want the full experience, just read the book.
Come again, bringing ruin, turning hope to despair and victory to death.
Begone, foul Dwymer, Lord of Carrion. Leave the dead in peace.
Come not between the Nazgul and his prey, or he will slay thee in turn.
Do what you will. I will hinder it if I may.
Hinder me? Thou fool! Dost thou not know the prophecy? No living man may hinder me.
But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Éowyn am I. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone, for living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him.
A woman? Éowyn? Tis Lord Theoden's niece. She wanted to ride with us, but he forbade. She disguised as a knight and she came hither.
A foul and putrid wind. How does she bear the stench of it?
Strong she is and brave. I must to her aid. It's empty.
Uncle, I